The cutting head has two blade holders, the bevel blade holder and the vertical blade holder. Both of them are constructed very similar to each other, show in detail the bevel blade holder, and then we'll cover the vertical blade holder in slightly less detail. The only tools you'll need is a 10mm spanner or wrench and a 4mm Allen key. First of all, remove the blade. Whilst you do so, inspect the blade holder to make sure the magnet is still firmly fixed in there, that the label isn't peeling up, and that everything looks in good condition. The blade lies between the two edges on each side. Make sure that that sits in there and slides up and down easily. Remove the clamping screw. And with the 10mm spanner, remove the nut. The nut is self-locking, so it will feel a little stiff, and then you should be able to remove it with your fingers. There is a washer underneath the nut. Now this is important that this washer is put back on in the correct fashion. I'll cover that in more detail. The bearing inside here, be careful it doesn't drop out, but just carefully lift the blade holder off, turn it in that direction, holding your finger over the bearing so that it doesn't fall out. Now that's quite firm, that one, but they do rattle out. Now on the inside you have two screws here which hold the handle in place. This screw here, which is only there to operate on the spring. Now the spring has come out of position. I'll show you how that all fits in, but the other thing to note is the washer that's here. This is a special hardened steel thrust washer, and very important that that stays in the correct position. It's held in place just by a smear of grease underneath there. I won't bother taking it out because it looks nice and clean, but if when you take yours apart it's dirty, remove that, just get a blade under the edge there, take it out, give it a good clean, and then re-lubricate with petroleum jelly or a good quality white grease. Do not use a brown grease. Underneath we have the thrust bearing. Now that usually sits there. As I say, that's fallen out of position when we've removed the blade holder, and the spring normally sits underneath it like so, and the head of the screw goes in this slot and it depresses the spring to give you the pull back action that you get on the cutting head. So we'll take that off for the moment. That can, although it's got two legs on there, that can only go back in one way, so don't worry about losing its orientation. Thrust bearing, thrust washer, the same as this one in here, and if you're careful you will find behind it, you may find 1, 2 or even 3 very thin shim washers. Very important that they go back inside. So that's the order they came off in. Okay, so now everything's off. Give the surface inside here a clean. If you need to use some spirit on a cloth, then do so, but only a small amount. You don't want the spirit getting down and around everywhere. Okay. When reassembling, first of all place the spring so that the short leg goes in the groove, and that will eventually go in that position, but just leave that sticking up there at the moment. Now with the washers, remember what we said before, that the shim washers, they go underneath if they're dirty, clean them with a cloth. If they're really dirty and you need to use some spirit, you can do. Just give these a quick clean. And lubricate with some grease. Don't need too much grease, that's too much. Just spread it around. Now place that, this is the shim washer, place that, the shim washers go on first, they're the very thin ones. Now the thrust washer, which is about 1 millimetre thick, that goes on last. That layer of grease holds everything together. Then finally the thrust bearing itself. Now you can put a little bit more grease in there so that it goes in between the rollers. It will work its way round as time goes on. I don't need to worry about getting an exact spread. Now just be careful that the spring doesn't fall out. Now, the thrust washer in here, this already has grease on the back holding it in position. I'll apply a little bit to the face. Be careful that this bearing doesn't fall out. Place your finger over there. Hold the blade holder up at that angle. Now if you look round the back, you'll find that the screw head that sticks out that gathers the spring, as you turn it, will collect the spring, and you want to turn it down and then push it down as it comes into its slot. If you hold your fingers on there, you can try it and see if the action feels okay. If everything seems okay and the thrust bearing, nothing else has fallen out of position, it should go down nice and parallel. Now, this, as we said before, is important. This washer is dish shaped. If I press onto the edge, you'll see there that it raises up. If I turn it over, it's not. You'll see this clearly when you actually take it off. Now, with it positioned as a bowl or as a dish, that way it needs to go on that direction so that it sits onto the shaft as a dish in that direction. The nut then follows. Be a little awkward to get in there. Now, don't do the nut all the way up. What you need to do is to make sure that there's a little bit of looseness there from side to side. Like that. Okay, and then you gradually tighten as you move it, and when that sideways motion disappears, then that's it. You don't want to over tighten that nut. If you do so, you can damage the bearing underneath. No movement there at all. Get a nice easy action when depressing the blade holder. Clamping screw back in. Blade holder back in. Make sure that's home. That's back together. A vertical blade holder I'll lift up the handle so I can get a better view of it. Now exactly the same principles apply. Take out the blade clamping screw. Inspect blade cartridge. Everything looks fine now. Remove the nut to take off the blade holder. You'll find exactly the same items inside. There's our dish-shaped washer, bearing in there as well. Now the only thing that is different from this blade holder, apart from it being vertical rather than bevel, is that it also has a lock on there, which I'll show you in a bit more detail once it's off. So same action, pull it away, tilt it up, hold your finger to stop the bearing falling out. We've had the thrust washer fall off from in there. So the thrust bearing has attached itself to there, and there again we have a thrust washer inside the blade holder. Same arrangement, the two screws here to hold the handle on, and the third screw there which acts on the spring, which is the same arrangement here, but it's handed differently. The vertical blade holder has a lock, which is basically just a pin, and that's withheld within the handle itself, so if you do need to get in there to clean it and lubricate it, removing these two screws, the handle comes off and you can get full access to the pin. So just give that a clean. Thrust bearing seems to be staying in there okay. Oh no, it's coming out. Let's put a little bit of grease on now. That will hold it in position. Stop it falling out. Let's put that down. Thrust bearing on the blade holder. Again, spread some grease around. We don't want too much, just a small, just a smear is fine. Now that will sit on there. I'm just going to tip that a little bit, make sure it doesn't fall off. Then our thrust bearing. Don't need to do both sides on this because it will sort of work itself through, run through between the grooves. Place that on now. Same action as before. Place your finger over the bearing, tilt it up at an angle. Then if you look at the back, and when the screw is in line with the back and catches onto the spring, and push that all the way down, hold it in the centre, make sure your lock is off. That feels fine. Now again, remember it's dish shape, so it goes that way on. So you can test it's dish shaped upwards. On with the nut. Same as before, move the blade holder from side to side and gradually do up the nut until that side play disappears. Just gone. That sounds good. Blade holder in, being careful of course of the blade itself. Clamping screw. To complete the job. Okay, now some final checks. Just make sure that the vertical blade holder goes down and springs up. With slides, of course. The lock, when you position the lock in, that the lock goes in and works. Pull the lock out, press the blade holder down, lock in again, that it locks down. Everything seems to be working there very well. And simply on the blade holder for the vertical, for the bevel side, just make sure that that's going down, coming back up again under its own weight, and that there's no side plate on either head.